Hi, everybody. Welcome to Making the Grade. I'm Michelle Edmonds with Idaho News 6. So nice to be with you on this Wednesday morning. And as always, we would love to hear your thoughts, your comments as we continue to progress through a pandemic dealing with education. We're going to be talking a lot about coronavirus in schools and what's happening, of course. And we'll also be touching on federal college aid. And to bring us up to speed on a lot of these different issues is my partner in crime, as I like to call him, Kevin Richert from Idaho Education News. Kevin, how are you doing?
Good, Michelle. How are you doing?
I'm really good. Thank you very much for asking. So let's jump right into it. While we kind of want to do an overall look at COVID-19 in schools, because so many, I guess we call them almost mini stories, have happened that affect every parent, child in this entire state, administrators and teachers alike. But let's specifically start with looking at what the governor talked about last week with these rapid tests possibly coming into schools, even as early as this week or next. Kevin, give me your thoughts on how testing in schools could change the way education possibly is happening in the state of Idaho.
Well, I know the governor and Department of Health and Welfare are hoping that this will sort of, be a game changer in terms of keeping schools open or allowing schools to reopen, or just to track the spread of coronavirus within schools, especially with an eye towards staff. This whole rapid testing program is designed to ramp up testing for teachers and staff. And I find myself going back to the news from a couple of weeks ago from the Middleton School District when we heard about a Middleton employee who passed away due to COVID-19. One of the trustees said at that meeting that about 25% of Middleton's staff was susceptible, was at higher risk for contracting COVID-19 because of age or because of other health conditions. And I don't think that Middleton is a unique situation here. I think if you went to other districts around the state or charters around the state, you probably hear a similar story. The concern here is the teachers or staff may be susceptible to contracting coronavirus and spreading coronavirus, and that these employees, especially ones who have health issues, are at enhanced risk for developing COVID-19 and the complications that can come with COVID-19. So I think the idea with these rapid tests, and we're talking about potentially more than 500,000 rapid tests available in the state, is to do testing in the schools, to test school employees, probably run multiple tests, I would imagine, over the course of the next 3 months. These are a lot of tests because the state has been reporting only about 20,000 or so tests a week at its peak. So you put in an infusion of this kind of tests and this volume of testing, it's going to be a very different, a very enhanced set of data that we were getting from the tests as opposed to what we've been seeing for the past 6 months.
Kevin, let's talk about getting data, though, because that's been one of the tricky points in all of this, is making sure that the protection of students or teachers who are being tested for coronavirus under HIPAA laws, but also then being able to quarantine certain groups. So this is going to get a little tricky, and how schools are reporting what coronavirus cases are within inside their own buildings is different depending on the school that you go to, the district that you're in.
Right. And well, one thing we did see last week was the Department of Health and Welfare launched its data page with school by school test results and positive cases in the schools. And what this does not do, it does not differentiate between students and staff or teachers. And it's not a complete data set. There are definitely limitations, especially one of the limitations is that smaller schools with 50 or fewer students are not reporting because of student privacy concerns. So there's some limitations to what we're going to get from the health and welfare data. But what it will do, at least, is it provides a little bit of a sense of where some of the hotspots might be. As I read the data on Friday when we got the first report from health and welfare, a couple of schools that we know have had issues in the past, like Emmett High School, Payette, North Star Charter in Eagle, well, those showed up as kind of hot spots. Those showed up with higher numbers, but we knew that was going to happen. But I also saw, in eastern Idaho, one of the schools in Preston, in the southeast corner of the state, had a spike in cases, and that was one I didn't know about. So I think that, this isn't perfect, but at least it's more data than we've been seeing. So it's something we'll be watching for each Friday, and we'll be summarizing each Friday when we do our weekly roundup on coronavirus case numbers and coronavirus trends.
And we should mention, Kevin, that Idaho Education News is also keeping a closer eye on higher education when it comes to Idaho's colleges and university campuses and what's happening with coronavirus. And not to be unexpected, but there's been another spike at the University of Idaho, and they've linked it pretty much to one area, again, that probably won't shock people.
It's a continuing spike, really, what's happening at the University of Idaho over the past couple of weeks. And you're right, it has been linked generally to Greek row, to fraternity houses, sorority houses, and to residents in those fraternities and sororities. The university does not think that what they're seeing right now is affecting, they don't think that it's coming through transmission through the classroom environment. So they think that it's been fairly well isolated to the fraternities and the sororities, and the testing has really been focused there, but they're hoping to, here again, they're hoping to ramp up testing. They're hoping to do testing of pretty much all students. And I think where you're at with the University of Idaho, where you're at really with all of the state institutions right now, the university leaders, the college leaders, they just want to get to Thanksgiving, because at the University of Idaho and Boise State as well, Idaho State, essentially the campus is going to close around Thanksgiving, and the rest of the fall semester is going to move online. So, what the university officials are saying, what the health officials are saying, what the administrators are hoping is just, let's stay open for the next 7 weeks. Let's at least keep classes going for the next 7 weeks and get to that, end of face-to-face instruction for fall semester, and we'll, then you'll have to regroup and see where you are in the spring. University of Idaho, it's been a little bit touch and go. I mean, last Friday, the U of I Argonaut reported this first. The university came out and said, we're going to continue face-to-face learning. There'd been some speculation that might not be able to continue. So for now, it's still face-to-face. And obviously that implies that if things got worse, that may not be the case in the future. So we're definitely keeping a close eye on the situation at University of Idaho, keeping a close eye on the other end of the state. BYU Idaho has had a spike in cases, and Madison County in general has had a huge spike in cases, not just on the campus. So we're watching the campuses, we're watching the communities surrounding them.
If you're just joining us, we have Kevin Richert from Idaho Education News on for Making the Grade on this Wednesday morning as you are joining us. If you do have a college student, wherever if they're in Idaho or elsewhere, we'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments on what your college student is doing, how they're managing their classwork, whether it be in person, in a hybrid model, if they're sitting in your house doing online school, maybe not being able to go off to their university or college in particular in person. Love to hear your thoughts or your comments on that. Kevin, we do know that the federal government is going to drop a little bit more coronavirus COVID-19 aid money into the university system. It's not a lot, but can you tell us a little bit about why they're now seeing a tiny bit more? Consider, and I say tiny, it's millions of dollars, but it's not the $50 million colleges received earlier in March.
Yeah, it's a little bit of an infusion of money into higher education. We're talking about $6 million, and it'll be split among the public institutions, also among the private institutions will receive a chunk of it. The biggest single chunk of money goes to Boise State University, and we're talking about $1.6 million. Boise State is not looking at that as a new source of, they're not looking at it as something that will fund new programs. They're going to use it maybe to offset some of the expenses that they've already had, offset some of the revenue losses they've already experienced because of the coronavirus pandemic, and maybe avoid having to further drain down their reserves. So don't look at this as a big change in terms of things that are going to be going on at Boise State. And I suspect maybe that would apply to the other colleges and universities as well.
Let's touch on another major story that both Idaho News 6 and Idaho Education News have been reporting in the last couple of days. And that there is now officially a recall for the state's largest school district's trustees. The entire school board at West Ada, there's a group that is looking to recall the entire trustee board, furious literally over the handling of schools not reopening for full in-person learning in West Ada. And before we get to why this recall is happening, Kevin, give us a tiny bit of a civics lesson, because this isn't a done deal and people will not be voting on this recall come their November ballots.
Recall election politics are very complicated. You and I know this. I mean, doesn't this feel like Back to the Future for you and I? I mean, 5 years ago, we were covering recall elections and recall campaigns in West Ada. Very different circumstances this time around, but we've seen this before. So let's talk about the civics first of all. It's a complicated process to get a recall election on the ballot, let alone get a recall passed. So once you get past this initial phase of turning in signatures to begin the recall process, then you have to gather signatures and gather enough signatures based on the votes that have been cast in previous elections to get a recall election on the ballot. So assuming that we get to that second hurdle, we'll be watching very closely to see, do the organizers of the recall gather enough signatures to get a recall on the ballot? We've seen with Boise City Hall that didn't happen with a campaign that went on earlier this year. It's not easy to do. And then once you get a recall election on the ballot, then it's not always easy to get a recall election passed. So if this gets on the ballot, and it probably won't be on the ballot before March, you would have to have a majority of voters say, yes, we want to recall this trustee or all 5 trustees. So you have to have a majority of voters vote in favor of recall, in favor of getting rid of the incumbent. And then the yes votes for the recall have to exceed the number of votes that office holder received in the previous election. So that's a pretty high hurdle to clear. And we've seen in the past, Middleton, again, a couple of years ago, had some recall elections that got to the ballot and barely a couple of trustees stayed in office. And it was a situation, as I recall, with at least one of the trustees where a majority of voters said, yes, we want to recall this trustee, but the number of votes in favor of the recall did not exceed the number of votes that trustee had received in the previous election. So by the narrowest of margins, that trustee stayed in office. It's a tough process. Now, this is a very emotional issue in West Ada. I mean, it's dividing families. It's created a lot of backlash between families who want to see face-to-face learning, full-time face-to-face learning, and trustees that are trying to sort of wrestle that demand against the health issues and the realities of the coronavirus. It's a very emotional issue. So the emotions of this issue, it might change the way this whole recall election unfolds. I mean, this is something that, obviously has hit home with parents of 40,000 kids in that district.
Kevin, have you seen or heard of any other districts who are proposing this, or is this kind of a first? And then I guess I would ask, could you see other districts go this direction with people being upset with how the Board of Trustees handled the COVID-19 situation in their district?
It's not a first, not even in this cycle, in the past couple of months. Pocatello-Chubbuck, you have a recall campaign going on against 3 of the trustees. It's a little bit of a different situation there. It is partly a response to a hybrid learning model in that school district. It's also a response to Pocatello High School decided to retire the Indians nickname. So the school board voted to get rid of that nickname. I think that's also been a factor in the recall effort in Pocatello. So that's 2 large school districts, though, that we know of that have recall elections in the hopper. So, will other districts, will you see that kind of backlash unfold in other districts? We'll just have to wait and see.
It's fascinating to me because as you talk about this, and it's most likely that any recall of this magnitude, talking about West Ada in particular, would not get on a ballot until at least March, as you mentioned. We could be in a very different spot by March. And I say not only with COVID-19 and how the schools are having to handle COVID-19, good, bad, or the same. Obviously, nobody has a crystal ball there. But where I wanted to drill down is that come January, the legislature is back in session, and there's no doubt that there will be talk in the legislature of how districts are handled compared to health districts, school districts versus health districts, and who has a say and when they have a say. And there literally could be laws changed, even maybe by the time this shows up on a March ballot. Don't you think, Kevin?
This is going to be a big issue at the legislative session. There's no question about it. The role of health districts in determining whether schools should open or remain open, how that interrelates with the decisions that are being made by school boards. You know, I go back a couple of weeks ago to a letter that a group of West Ada area legislators sent to the school board, urging the board to go to full-time face-to-face instruction. And some powerful lawmakers signed on to that letter. So there's a lot of concern at the State House about the closure of schools, the gradual reopening of schools in the case of West Ada, a lot of angst about the, you know, a lot of legislators want to see schools just reopened, period. And a lot of legislators are very concerned about the role that health and welfare, that the local health districts are playing in those decisions. Even though it's the school board's call, the health districts still have a pretty significant role here that they play in terms of the dialogue about school opening or school closing. So this will be a big issue at the legislative session. There's no question about that.
Let's move on and talk about a story that you posted at Idaho Ed News that deserves a lot of attention. And if you are a parent with a high schooler, I would ask you to listen up, because there is federal college aid that is available to your student, and it's not going well for people who are applying for that money. So, Kevin, this is called the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, better known as
the FAFSA. Yes.
And it really, it's discouraging in a sense, the story that you wrote, because the FAFSA itself, if anybody has tackled this application, it is no easy task, and therefore it can become so cumbersome, especially in a year when we're faced with pandemic issues where parents may not have the support that they need, that there is federal aid for students wanting to go on to college that's not getting used.
Right. First of all, if you're a parent who's had to navigate the FAFSA, I feel you. I had to do this as a parent too. It is a really time-consuming and complicated form. I mean, relative to the tax returns that we file, it is a bear. But it is also a very important document, because this is the form that will determine whether your son or daughter is eligible for federal college aid, grants, loans, work study. It's also important in Idaho. So, it's important and it's required for students who want to get one of the state's opportunity scholarships. You have to fill out this form to be eligible for that aid. So, for a college-bound student, you're leaving a lot of money on the table not filling out this form. And based on yet another study, and we've written about this before, but this is the latest study, there are a lot of parents and a lot of students who are just not filling out this form. I think the number was about 46%, according to this most recent study. That puts Idaho near the bottom nationally. There are only about a handful of states, 6 states, all in the West, that have a lower completion rate than Idaho's 46.3% completion rate. And here's another thing, and I'm not really sure what to make of this, but it kind of jumped out at me when I looked at the numbers. Fewer high school seniors filled out a FAFSA in 2020, in the 1920 school year, than they did in the previous year, than seniors in that previous year. So the raw number of students who filled out a FAFSA went down a little bit. Don't know what that means. Don't know what to make of that. Don't know if that's a another outgrowth of coronavirus and the pandemic, and students and parents saying, you know, we're just going to put off college for a year, or college just does not fit into our plans at all, whatever. But that's a trend that's obviously not going in the right direction. This is something that state leaders have been pushing for, the state board has been pushing for, really encouraging kids and parents to get that form in. The filing period is just beginning. October 1st was the beginning of the FAFSA filing period, and what the state board is urging parents and students to do is fill out the paperwork and fill it out fairly quickly, because in some cases, colleges and universities, they may run out of aid. So it's a little bit of first come, first serve. So in order to get in the running for this financial aid, you need to apply, and ideally you should apply soon.
And Kevin, we should mention too, you and I have done enough stories now where we've talked specifically with school, college, and career counselors that are now in place in the schools, in the high schools, or at least at the district level. And we're talking about from some of the smallest districts to the largest ones. These are the people you can turn to as a parent and as a student to help you through this process. I mean, the districts know how difficult this is, and they have specifically trained up people inside their own districts to help kids. So there is help available. I want to make sure parents know that.
There definitely is, and I don't know what the state of that help will be. I mean, you mentioned the college and career advisors in the schools. They're definitely a resource. A lot of schools in past years have had a FAFSA night where they encourage parents and kids to show up at school and get help filling out a FAFSA. Now, I don't know how you can do that, or if you can do that in the middle of a pandemic. If you move that to some sort of a virtual format where you go online and you get some help. The point is, there's help out there. This is not an easy process. This isn't a fun process, but it is a very important process if you're contemplating college. If you're, thinking about going to college and you're wondering about how you can afford college, well, this is one step that you can take to find out if you're eligible for federal aid and to get in the running for federal aid and state aid as well.
Kevin, we appreciate you writing that article. And if any of these stories that we have talked about you're interested in, of course, you can go to idahoednews.org to read the full story. There are links there to places that you might want to look at, like if you have a University of Idaho college student and you want to have a link directly to where the university is posting information about coronavirus, that's all within inside idahoednews.org. Really appreciate you providing those hyperlinks and those stories too, Kevin.
And I want to point out that we're writing every week about the college coronavirus case numbers, not just for U of I. We do a roundup every Monday looking at all 11 public and private institutions across the state to just look at the trends. And, the trends that we saw in the piece on Monday, not very encouraging. A lot of institutions seeing increases in case numbers.
Well, you're breaking up just a little bit, but before I let you go, I have to say that we sometimes do a sock segment, we do a mask segment, something, I don't know, I need to come up with a better name for it. Maybe we'll ask people out there to name our last segment, which is
show and tell. It's our weekly show and tell.
It's our weekly show and tell. Yeah, why not? The elementary kids get to bring stuff for show and tell. So Kevin brings something for, you know what, that's what I love it. So this is Kevin's show and tell to Michelle and the rest of the world. And this one in particular, people will understand in a heartbeat. Do you want to show and tell?
Yeah, not socks this week, but this is one. So in addition to, I'm also a pin collector, music fan, pin collector, and there was really only one I could wear today. Let's see if I can. Okay, there we go. Eddie Van Halen.
Oh, Eddie.
What can I say that hasn't already been said? He was a giant. He was one of the greatest guitar players we've ever seen. I had the opportunity to see Van Halen in concert once. He was incredible. And, so definitely in morning today, listening to a lot of Van Halen on my computer as I work, he was a genius and, gone too soon.
Oh, isn't that 2020? Genius is gone too soon.
Cancer. This is a collaboration of cancer and 2020 taking away, just a brilliant musician.
That and a brilliant actor not so long ago as well with Chadwick. Yeah. Kevin, thank you for wearing the pin. I like that. Your show and tell was well done. I give you an A, my friend.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for Making the Grade. Everyone, you can continue to leave your comments, your thoughts, your questions. We appreciate you joining us on this Wednesday morning. Have a great day, everybody.